Okay, good morning, everybody. Delighted to see that we have, I think now almost everybody who was waiting has joined us, and we'll get started on time so that we can finish on time. Welcome to this special discussion this morning on the emerging, I think it's wrong sometimes to say emerging crisis in the Sahel, to say the ongoing crisis in the Sahel region, hosted by the Africa APPG and by Crisis Action. Thanks very much to Hayley, Davidson and Crisis Action for organising this event. My name is Jack McConnell. I'm a member of the House of Lords, and I am a Vice Chair of the Africa APPG with a specific interest in West and Central Africa. Delighted today that we have 4 expert contributors to kick off and contribute to our discussion. There will be an opportunity to ask questions within the obvious limitations of time. We have 1 or 2 questions that have been submitted in advance, but please do let me know in the chat function if you would like to ask a question, and I'll do my very best to, at the very least, bring in all the topics, but if possible, bring in those who want to ask as well. The Africa APPG is a cross-party group, a large cross-party group of UK parliamentarians that seeks to organise regular discussions on issues affecting the whole of the continent. So it's very vast and wide. We have had a historic interest, obviously, in the Sahel region and the importance of that region, both to those who live there, to the wider regions, of which the Sahel is part, the continent as a whole, and of course the global impact as well. The Africa APPG is supported by the Royal Africa Society, and we're very grateful to them for their continuing support. And of course, Crisis Action works as a catalyst and a coordinator for organisations working together in global coalitions to compel those in power to protect civilians in war zones, including, of course, at the moment in Syria, Yemen and the Sahel, doing critically important work on behalf of some of the most vulnerable people on the planet. So I'd like to kick off today with a video from Crisis Action. And I think, Hayley, are you going to introduce this video, or would you like me to explain?
Go ahead.
Okay, well, this is a video of the director of the Centre for Communication in Ouahigouya in Burkina Faso to provide an overview of local peacebuilding efforts on the ground.
Les régions du Sahel en Afrique traversent aujourd'hui une période très critique et très difficile liée à l'insécurité. Les causes de cette insécurité peuvent être recherchées à travers les causes structurelles, mais aussi les causes socio-culturelles. Aujourd'hui, nous voyons que beaucoup de partenaires, beaucoup d'États s'organisent pour apporter leur aide et leur soutien aux pays africains, notamment les pays du Sahel. Tout cela est à saluer et à féliciter, mais nous ne devrons pas perdre de vue quelque chose de très important. Toutes les interventions, quelle que soit leur nature ou leur forme, doivent avoir une priorité, mettre la protection des civils et la sécurité humaine au cœur de toute réponse dans les régions du Sahel. Aujourd'hui, ce que nous constatons, nous voyons qu'on met beaucoup plus l'accent, beaucoup plus de moyens dans la lutte contre l'extrémisme, du moins contre l'extrémisme violent, notamment contre le terrorisme, ce qui est une bonne chose. Mais la lutte contre l'extrémisme violent ne serait occulter les vrais problèmes, les vraies difficultés auxquelles les populations des régions du Sahel en Afrique font face. La notion de sécurité doit être élargie. Il faut prendre en compte aussi les besoins fondamentaux des populations. Il faut prendre en compte les besoins humanitaires. Il faut prendre en compte aussi les droits de l'homme. Il faut prendre en compte aussi les droits internationaux liés à toute action humanitaire. C'est tout cet ensemble que les acteurs, que les États, que les ONG, que les bailleurs de fonds doivent tenir compte dans leur politique et dans leur intervention au Sahel. Nous lançons un appel à tous les acteurs, à tous les partenaires à tenir compte de la protection des civils et la sécurité humaine dans leurs interventions, en faisant en sorte que leurs interventions soient mesurées et soient évaluées à l'aune de ce critère ultime qu'est la protection des civils et la sécurité humaine.
Well, thank you very much to Crisis Action for that that background, a glimpse of the situation in the Sahel, where so many international crises come together in the joint combined effort, impact of climate change, of conflict, of extreme poverty, and so many other problems. And in no other part of the world is it so necessary to see the whole, not just to see part of the crisis, and for people to work together across interests and sectors and countries and expertise. So we have a wide range of contributors talking about this today to give us that overview. And our first speaker today is Dr. Niagalé Bagayoko, who's a political researcher, and Niagalé is chair of the Africa Security Sector Network. She was previously program manager for the peace program at the International Organization of the Francophonie, and she has a history of both academic and practical work, advocacy work as well, about the region and beyond. Niagalé, can you kick off our discussion today? Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry, I was mute. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I forgot also to say that I used also to work at the Institute for Development Studies in the University of Sussex. So it's a privilege for me to make this presentation. I think that what is very important today is to understand how complex and multifaceted is the security situation in the Sahel today. Of course, you have jihadi groups very active in the region, but it is, however, very important to have a deep understanding of the differences in the way they are using violence against who and for which political purposes they are doing so. Presently, you have two major jihadi groups. First, you have the Groupe de soutien à l'islam et aux musulmans, GSIM under the French acronym, or GIM under the Arabic one, which is affiliated to Al-Qaeda and which is mostly targeting international forces and also all representative of the states, of course, national armies, but also governance, teachers, etc. It's interesting to say that it is with this group that some talks have been initiated by the Malian authorities under President Ibeka regime before he fell. But those talks were initiating following the recommendation from a national inclusive dialogue. That is why this option of negotiation is today discussed and was once again mentioned in the roadmap, which was adopted after the coup, which occurred in last August. The second jihadi group is the so-called EIGS, État Islamique au Grand Sahara, which is in fact the Sahelian branch of the Islamic State in the West African province. And it is on this group which had been decided that the International Coalition for Sahel should focus in the so-called three-border region. It is also very important to note that those two groups are competing and fighting each other since the beginning of 2020. But you have also other actors of violence. First, you have rebel groups which do have autonomy claims, in particular in northern Mali, and some of which have signed the 2015 peace agreement. And also, some of those groups are competing, one being against each other, and some of them are closer to the Malian authorities. You also have self-defense groups and militias, particularly in central Mali, but also in Burkina Faso, all over the territory, which are based on community affiliations and which can be very, very violent. For instance, some groups of the so-called Ouedraogo in Burkina Faso, or also the Dana Amasagu militia, which is a Dogon milice. You also have unidentified armed gunmen who are targeting populations, including their belongings and in particular their livestock. And also to finish this sad situation, portraying this sad situation, you also have abuses which are committed by some units of the military forces in Niger, in Mali, or in Burkina Faso. And it's important to mention the fact that the population are the first target of all those actors. So we definitely think that there is a need to have an answer going well beyond the fact the only fight against terrorism, and to develop an approach based on 4 pillars. First, on protection of civilians. Second, on developing a political approach, taking in particular into account all governance challenges, which are in fact at the heart of all the claim of all those groups. Third, is in humanitarian access, and finally, fighting impunity. So I will stop there because I think I have used my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Niagalé, for that excellent introduction, giving us a context, an overview of the complexity of the situation, but the need for a political response, not just a security response, being so important if we're going to have peace and stability and then development. So we'll come back to you with for questions later. Our second contributor today is Maureen Magee. Maureen is the Regional Director for Central and West Africa for the Norwegian Refugee Council. Maureen previously has worked in the Central African Republic, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Iraq, in the DRC. She has been around the region and beyond, involved in some of the most protracted conflicts and crises that we discuss regularly in this group. And we're delighted to have her here today to give her experience and perspective, and to describe to us perhaps the scale of the humanitarian crisis that comes as a result of the many issues that Niagalé has just outlined.
Thank you very much. Thank you for convening this important topic and this opportunity to share our experience and views on the humanitarian situation. So as of today, there are 13.4 million people in need of urgent humanitarian assistance across the 3 countries of the Central Sahel. According to Google, that is equivalent of the population of London, Manchester, and Newcastle combined. So while figures are important, it is hard to get our heads around figures. We have numbers flashing across our screens every single day. How many new COVID cases today? How many votes are there left to count in Pennsylvania? So I'd like to try to put a face on some of these figures. What is it like to be one of the 1.6 million people this year alone who have been forced to flee their homes, leaving everything behind? And I'm going to tell you about a man from Burkina Faso. His name is Zambende. He is married, he has 7 children, and he was forced to flee his home. This is what he told us. Armed men arrived in the village looking for men. 10 men from my village were killed that day. I only survived by hiding, and that very night I started walking. I walked by foot for 5 days. When I arrived in Kongusi, I had no food, no water, and no shelter. I remember when it first rained. Myself and my family, we were unable to sleep. The rain was pouring in. NRC has been able to provide shelter to Zambende and over 8,000 other families in Niger and Burkina Faso. But there are tens of thousands of families who still haven't had any support, and they don't have a safe and dignified place to sleep. In Mali, our rapid response teams have assessed the needs of 193,000 displaced people, again, this year alone. And many of these people have been displaced 2 or 3 times. This shows the cycle, very much as Niagalé was talking about, of incessant violence and the extreme vulnerability of civilian populations. The last time I was in Mali, before COVID, last January, I met with a group of mothers in Sukuru. They had fled their village 3 days prior. There were 4 or 5 women who were very heavily pregnant. They found themselves in a strange place. They had no idea where the health center was, and much less any idea how they were going to pay if they needed to have care due to complications. So in addition to NRC providing important critical information, we immediately set up a small playground. This was to allow the kids a small moment of being children and to start the very long process of healing after the trauma they had experienced and continue to experience. Education in the region is under peril. Just like we've seen in Mali for years, we're now seeing in Burkina Faso direct attacks on teachers and on schools. Over 4,000 schools are closed in the Central Sahel due to conflict and violence and attack on schools. This is before COVID, where everything closed. And today, those schools remain closed. 55% of kids in the Central Sahel are not going to school. Imagine if that was the case in the UK. So COVID-19, luckily, the direct health impact has not been, to date, I just knocked on wood, as bad as we had feared in the Central Sahel. However, the secondary impacts, especially the socioeconomic impacts, have been extremely severe. On displaced people, this is yet another challenge they have to overcome. So I'll give you one more story of a woman named Aissata. She's 25 years old. She fled to Bankas with her 3 children. And in order to be able to support her family, she started cleaning houses of the host community. So she told us she would work for them and get food in exchange. This allowed me to feed my children, as my husband, a farmer, doesn't have access to land, so he can no longer farm. However, when the pandemic started, the host community was scared. They thought that people like Aissata would bring the virus. They no longer wanted her to come to their home, and she, quite frankly, was too scared to go out as well. There's also the longer term of the global pandemic, which means that women like Aissata might receive less and less assistance in the future. There is a tendency for us to turn inwards. The socioeconomic crisis of our own countries means that we will probably deprioritize places like the Sahel, leaving women like Aissata behind. But the UK can have a strong role to make sure that the Sahel is not forgotten. The UK is engaged in many conferences coming up and can use its leadership voice in the upcoming COP meeting, in the G20 meeting, and in the upcoming presidency in the G7. The UK can ensure that the Sahel and the humanitarian needs in the Sahel remain on the agenda. To date, the overarching focus of the international community, as was also said by Niagalé, has been on counterterrorism and a militarized approach in the Sahel. This has largely been led by France. However, years of militarized action has not led to more safety for the civilians. There is a real need to recalibrate international assistance. Yes, security is critical, but also immediate humanitarian assistance, longer-term investment in development, and also supporting community-based conflict resolution mechanisms are key if we want to turn the tide in the Sahel. The UK has the expertise and the convening power to shift communications onto extremely important issues like humanitarian access in the Sahel. And we were very grateful that the UK helped to co-host an event on civil-military coordination a couple of weeks ago with NRC and OCHA. The UK can help to balance out the security-focused approach and make a real difference in the region. Finally, the appointment of Nick Dyer as the UK's Famine Prevention and Humanitarian Affairs Envoy is another opportunity, and we are already extremely excited that he has been engaged in the Sahel, and we hope that that will continue. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maureen. Some both big numbers there, but also some very precise and detailed descriptions of the impact on individuals and communities. And while we know that the UK has been a significant contributor to this important work in the Sahel over recent years, that I'm sure members will have questions about the UK's role moving forward. So thank you very much, Maureen. That's really helpful. Our third speaker is Ousmane Diallo. Ousmane is a researcher for Amnesty International covering West and Central Africa. He's from Senegal and he's working specifically on the Sahel, particularly in the Central Sahel region with Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso. So Ousmane is going to talk to us about the critical issue of impunity. And while obviously conflict resolution and the humanitarian crisis and conflict prevention, discussions and dialogue are important, impunity remains a major issue. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say, Ousmane. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to the APPG and to Crisis Action for inviting me to talk about human rights and impunity in the Central Sahel. So as said by Niagalé and by Maureen, there is a complexity at play in the Sahel with a plurality of actors. Some of them are jihadists, some of them are community-based, and also you have the military response led by the Sahelian states. So since 2017, there has been an increase in the impact of the military operations on civilian populations. And since this year, in 2020, the impact of the military operations against civilians done by Sahelian armies, whether from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, has exceeded the impact of the activities of the armed groups on civilian populations in the Sahel. And this is partly in response to an urge to produce results, as some of the armed groups, such as the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, launched attacks in the tribal region separating Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and won military victories that led to the post-summit in January and an urge to be more decisive and to have impact. So the problem is that the military response has often led to gross human rights violations in terms of extrajudicial executions, unlawful killings, and enforced disappearances. Over this year, in 2020, we have documented human rights violations such as extrajudicial executions, and unforced disappearances in the Nyono region of Mali, where one month after the beginning of Operation Maliko, but also in the tri-border area, such as the Circle of Koro and Bankas, where you have a lot of actors at play and a lot of violence against civilian populations. And this is not something that is novel in the Sahel. This has been going on for a while. I think last year there was a big media interest in the after the Ouedraogo massacre, after the 157 civilian populations were unlawfully executed by Dana Ambasago, one of the armed groups in Mali. And often there has been promises of investigations done by the government of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, but seldom do you see a judicial follow-up that will lead to penal responsibilities being found and people being tried and justice being given to the victims. So this, I'm only talking about the impact of the military operations because Maureen talked about the socio-economic and the other impact of the crisis in the Sahel. And it is interesting to consider why there is impunity at play in the Sahel. Why, despite the promises of investigations, why, despite the investigations done by the Human Rights Division of MINUSMA and being submitted to the judicial courts in Mali, there has been no follow-up so far. And last week, I had an interesting conversation with a prosecutor in Mali. So he's based in central Mali. And from that conversation, you get the sense that impunity prevails because first, there is a lack of political will from the governments because the relations between the armies and the central governments are very touchy. And sometimes the governments do not want to go too deep in dealing with the alleged exactions committed by the armies. And this has a very negative impact because it erodes the trust between communities and the government, and it runs contrary to the political objectives that are set up by the different governments and their international partners in the Sahel, because there is no justice. And justice is no longer expected by the local communities from the government. But he also told me about the logistical challenges he faced in his course of work. So often the state's presence in those rural areas, whether in the Mopti region, beyond the regional capital Mopti, Sévaré, and especially next to the border between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, state presence is very limited. So you seldom have, even the local councillors are no longer based there. They have all fled due to the insecurity, and you only have military presence and the shadow presence of the different armed groups. And so he was telling me that, okay, when there is an alert about an incident that occurred somewhere, it's very tough for him to go to that place and to do the investigations because first, often he doesn't have a car or the fuel to go to that place that is 50 kilometers from his regional capital. And often he has to send instructions to the military and to the police or other security forces. And since they are not under his direct authority, the diligence that they do in helping him go there and his team in order to investigate those incidents is depends on the relations he has with those actors. So you have also the lack of resources and institutional design that leads to this general scale of impunity that alienates the trust between the local communities and the security and defense forces, but also towards the government in general. And whether in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the judiciary is very weak compared to the military or to the political institutions. So the administrative branches of the government, they do not have always the resources and the capacities to initiate investigations if they are not supported by the security and defense forces and also by the administrative authorities. So this contributes to the cycle, especially in the sense that we have tit-for-tat attacks often occurring in the Sahel. So you have, for example, the military suffering a defeat, as happened 1 month ago in Mali, in Sokura. And 10 days later, you have the military accompanied by militias such as Dana Ambasagu launching an attack that led to the death of 24 civilian populations in Libya. And people no longer, communities, it's very sad, but they no longer expect a judicial follow-up because the attacks have been occurring for such a long time and they have been documented to no avail. And I think it's very important for the United Kingdom as it launches as it contributes to the UN mission in Mali to also support those judiciary institutions in terms of training, in terms of capacities, but also in pressuring the government to allow them to do properly their work. Because, for example, we have a very, about logistical issues in Gao, due to the insecurity, all of the presidents of the higher tribunals in the region live in one building in Gao. So nobody is dispatched to their local circumscriptions. They are all in the capital, and they have one car that they have to share between them in order to do their work. So that creates real challenges. And just one example before finishing. So this year, Amnesty International documented the enforced disappearances of 102 villages in the Ayoro market and in the Tillabéri region of Niger. So they went to the fair market in Ayoro. Some of them came from Mali, most of them came from Inates. And the army intervened in the market, arrested many of them. And in the days that followed, they went to several hamlets in the neighboring communities to arrest people. So most of them were members of the Fulani and Tuareg communities. And afterwards, you had local councillors drafting lists and getting in touch with Amnesty and other organizations talking about those disappearances. And when we did the investigation, talked with survivors and local councillors, it was plain that the army was responsible because they were using military cars, and many of the soldiers and commanders that were involved were known to the locals. So the Nigerian human rights institutions did an investigation that was much more thorough than Amnesty International due to logistical reasons. So they went to those places, they found mass graves, they talked with many survivors, and they found in their report that the army was responsible for executing extrajudicially 72 people. They found 72 corpses in 6 mass graves, and they couldn't account for the 30 remaining disappeared person. And after this was presented before the public, there was just a rebuttal by the Ministry of Defense saying that this is not the case. The army is not responsible, and this is possibly the responsibility of armed groups that came from Mali and that sometimes use the fatigues of Nigerian soldiers. So it just shows how hard it is to fight against impunity due to these various factors. And even when national human rights institutions undertake amazing work and under very precarious security conditions and under political pressure to show the responsibility of army, there is no follow-up. So especially on this case, I think it would be very interesting if the UK could engage the Nigerian government on this report and strengthen the capacities of the judiciary, not only in Niger, but in the Sahel in combating impunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Usman. That was really helpful, and we must continue to focus on these critical issues of impunity if we're going to have a long-term strategy. The fourth and final contributor today is, before we move to questions and discussion, is Dr. Alex Vines, OBE, who's the director of the Africa Programme at Chatham House, will be well known to many of you. He's going to talk particularly about the UK's interests and role in the Sahel and the need for a comprehensive political strategy. Alex, full biography, or at least paragraph from his biography, I should say, is in the chat function along with the other 3 speakers. So please do read all of them. But as well as leading the Africa Programme at Chatham House, Alex chaired the UN panel of experts on Cote d'Ivoire in 2005. He was a member of the UN panel of experts on Liberia previous to that, and he has been involved in many countries around the world and with many multilateral organisations over these last 30 years, producing reports, leading teams, contributing to the knowledge and the action that is required. And Alex, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the UK's role in all this, because I think particularly perhaps in what Usman was saying there, I think there is a dilemma here for the UK about the role of the UK and the role of France in supporting conflict prevention, humanitarian work and development in this region. And it'll be interesting to hear what you say about what you think the UK's role should be.
Lord McConnell, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. So clearly, the first point I want to make is that the British engagement in the Sahel is deepening as we speak. So it is being spearheaded now by a military engagement, by supporting, as Usman had already said, there is a task group of the British Army that will be contributing to the UN multi-dimensional integrated stabilization mission in Mali, which is, as we all know, called MINUSMA. It's been upgraded further than it was. We heard from the Ministry of Defence at the end of last month that there will be 300 personnel deploying. Originally, it had been 250. So that's already an upgrade of the commitment. And the task group will provide MINUSMA with a dedicated long-range ground reconnaissance capability that has been lacking since soldiers from the Dutch 11 Air Mobile Brigade completed their last patrol in April 2019. They will be based in Gao, and they're drawn from the Light Dragons and Anglian regiments and supported by a detachment from the 32nd Regiment Royal Artillery, which specializes in unmanned aerial vehicles. So that is the spearhead. And indeed, the deployment's taking place next month, and the pre-deployment preparations are already underway. There is a group of personnel already in Gao, including also an advanced party of special forces, SAS, from the UK. So this is happening, and it's part of a broader pattern that the UK has also been supporting France's Operation Barkhane in the Sahel, as many of you know, since 2018. There are 3 CH-47 Chinook heavy lift helicopters in Mali. That commitment was just in the middle of this year renewed. So the UK is also supporting France and its Operation Barkhane. So this all fits in more broadly to a pivot towards the Sahel and a Sahel strategy that UK government has adopted. Now, this original Sahel strategy was very fluffy and not well defined. There was a tremendous debate within Whitehall this year, and a new Sahel strategy has now been agreed, which underpins the military and development engagements, but also a significant investment in a diplomatic network across the Sahel. So you need to think full embassy in Mauritania, bigger embassy in Dakar, much bigger embassy and more personnel in Bamako. A British ambassador has arrived and is operational in Niamey, Niger, for the first time. A British ambassador will soon be in Chad. So that is a commitment, and some of the money from that has come from elsewhere. Places that the UK had previously focused on, Zimbabwe, for example, has seen a redirection over the recent years of funds to the Sahel. But having said that, the ambition of the Sahel strategy a few years ago is no longer. So there is going to be less money, less people buttressing this commitment that we're seeing of the British Army Task Force going to support the UN. So the question I think we need to ask is, how can you do things well with less money, but more focus, which maybe is a better strategy. So it is about prioritization, including, I think, this whole question about the development security nexus, that the British engagement should not just be about security. It is about getting development into really difficult, dangerous places. And is there learning that the UK has made from elsewhere in the world, Afghanistan, Syria, and elsewhere that it's been involved in? So why is Britain doing this Sahel strategy? And this is my last few points. Well, there are a number that are tied to broader geopolitics. The first one is obviously in a Brexit environment, the relationship with France and the European Union partners are really important. And we do need to regard the Sahel as extended European neighborhood. This really matters for our European partners, and particularly our Southern European partners. And so that's important to kind of partner in this situation. A second is the UN Security Council. The UK is a permanent member, and there is plenty of discussion in the Council on the Sahel. And so showing responsibility and leadership and having independent thinking is really important for the United Kingdom in that regard. And so therefore contributing 300 troops for peacekeeping is a British contribution to be compared with other permanent members of stepping up to the plate. But finally, the two final points are, there are economic interests growing in the Sahel. These are less talked about, but we should accept them. So for example, Senegal and Mauritania start to have more important economic ties to the United Kingdom. The involvement of BP there, for example, is a good example of that. Also, in a way, there is more commercial interest in a country like Mali now linked to Britain than France. And that's to do with mining companies that are listed in London that produce gold in Mali and actually in Burkina Faso. So there is an overlap there that actually almost makes Britain a little bit different from France, that is not so deeply potentially integrated into the economic side of things. And then finally, I think there is the importance of this region for containing the problems that we're talking about. My biggest alarm has been how dramatically the security situation has deteriorated in Burkina Faso. That immediately threatens a country that the United Kingdom is deeply tied to for history and for human reasons, and that's Ghana. I mean, from my understanding, Ghanaian intelligence foiled a terrorist attack that was being planned last December in Ghana that was being planned through the Sahel. This is really increasingly important, the broader neighborhood for the United Kingdom. And so the final point is that the UK will need to develop an integrated strategy. It has a joint Sahel department, and bringing in development, diplomacy, as well as security is really, I think, the way forward. Thank you very much. Well,
Thank you, Alex. That was very focused and very, very, very helpful. There are two people who've indicated already that they'd like to ask questions. So I will put my questions aside for a minute and bring both of them in. The first is Nick Westcott, who wants to ask about regional coordination and external support. And the second is John Sandwich, the Earl of Sandwich, who has a question in the same general area. So can I have Nick first and then followed by John?
Hi, Nick Westcott here. Thanks very much, Jack, and to all the panelists. They're really helpful briefings. As Mr. Ouedraogo said in the crisis action video at the beginning, in some ways, the insecurity is a symptom rather than a cause of the problems. And then if you tackle only the security issues, as a number of the briefers have said, you don't get at the core of the problem. That is partly development, but it's also fundamentally political. And there's a challenge here that increasingly the states of the region, Mali, obviously, Burkina Faso now, Niger as well, are not able to assure the security of their own citizens. And this is both a security problem. Their armies are not effective. And as the amnesty briefer said, they can sometimes be counterproductive. I'm still here, but sorry for that. But it's also the political challenge. Now, can regional coordination address that? There is the G5 group Sahel, which is primarily a security body. But as Alex has said, all regional countries, including Nigeria, including Cote d'Ivoire, including Ghana, now have an interest in improving security in the Sahel. Can they bring political pressure to bear to solve some of these problems of separatism and intercommunity problem. Local conflict resolution mechanisms can work sometimes, but in Mali, the jihadists have tended to kill the people trying to achieve community conflict resolution. And secondly, does all this external intervention, I mean, in Mali, you have MINUSMA, you have Barkhane, you have 2 European missions, but none of them seem to be able to fundamentally affect the situation. Can wider international engagement move perhaps more to the political sphere and to try and resolve the security dilemmas? Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. John Sandwich.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, John.
Oh, good, because I can't see even you, Jax, I'm afraid, at the moment, but I hope it'll work.
Not missing much, don't worry.
Not meant to. Okay, I'm very encouraged by the British government's decision, as we've just heard, to strengthen the operation, not just the French, but I mean on an EU basis, because we were part of EU missions. But there's one aspect which was missing from the presentations, which was originally called the Khartoum process. And it was an EU program to monitor migration. And of course, the Sahel is the source of a lot of migration, although I understand it's slowing down a lot. And so if somebody could just make one comment on that, I'd be most grateful.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in, just given the time, I'm going to bring in a couple of other people before we go back to the contributors, if that's okay with the contributors, because I think these are relevant questions that fall in the same area. Joe, is it Gazeley? Do we have Joe? Go ahead, Joe.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Quick question from you, please.
Oh, great. Thanks. Yeah, I was just asking a quick question, which is that given the recent coup d'etat and the developments in Mali, is it appropriate for the UK to be involved in military operations? And if so, if the panelists think so, then how could we use our influence to encourage a return back towards democracy and a normal constitutional life?
Thank you. I'm going to quickly go around the contributors and then come back to Lord Chidgey after that. Niagalé, do you want to respond to some of the questions and points that have been made?
Okay, thank you very much. First, what about regional actors? It's very important to understand that there are kind of carousel, I would say, of regional actors in the Sahel region. And in fact, the G5 Sahel is just a new player which has been added to an already important number of stakeholders. It's also important to understand the reason why, the main reason why, according to me, G5 Sahel was created, which is related to the fact that Mauritania, in fact, which has been the most important supporter to this project, is not a member of ECOWAS itself. And you were mentioning the fact that today insecurity is spreading to Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Benin, etc. All of them being members of ECOWAS, notwithstanding the fact that you also do have another very important front, which we have not talked about, and which is located on the Lake Chad region, at the border of Niger, Chad, and also Cameroon and Nigeria. So the need for ECOWAS itself to be involved is a real question, as well as the role of the African Union. So I definitely think that there is a need to have much more coherence with between all those actors. And regarding the international intervention, I think that today we have to recognize the fact that there is a collective failure in the Sahel. It's not only about France, it's not only about the UN, it's not only about the G5, it's not only about the other organizations which I've just mentioned. I think that the problem is the approach which has been promoted and the understanding of the situation, which has been mainly focused on security related questions. Of course, here it's not the idea is not to deny the importance of the military approach in particular, but first it is important to see that reinforcing the capacities of the military, which is beyond the operations themselves, the objective of all the actors, be them Barkhane or the MINUSMA, it's not enough. The governance of the military itself is very important, and we Mr. Gazeley just mentioned the coup in Bamako. We can see that probably reinforces only the operational capacities of the forces is not enough when you have a coup. And also, we have not talked about the fact a lot of defense budget diversions have been seen only in 2020, which are millions and millions of euros, which have been used for other purposes than reinforces the capacities of the soldiers which are dying on the ground. So governance of the security apparatus themselves is a key aspect. And of course, also the question of human rights respect from those forces. So even if you're looking only at the security approach, you can see that there are a lot of missing links. Just to finish, I think that this is the reason why there is a need today to refocus the approach on the protection of populations. And this is also implying that security will be also a very important tool, but security is not only about the military, it is also about the police forces, it is also about the penal chain. So you can see that if you are just looking at security, if you consider that the target is not only neutralizing jihadi groups, but to put the focus on protecting the civilians and the populations, and also in fighting impunity, and having also a more political approach, as was mentioned. I think you could have different results, even if, of course, the situation is very complex and tricky. Thank you.
Thank you, Niagalé. Maureen, do you want to pick up specifically on the issue about migration that John Sandwich raised?
Migration is a complicated one. I mean, I'm coming from a humanitarian perspective, right? And we operate according to the humanitarian principles. Our goal is to ensure that people are not suffering. The political agendas behind that, many of which were laid out quite well by Alex as well. There are economic things at play. There is a migration agenda in Europe. All of that is a context in which we work, but we try to focus on ensuring that women, mothers, children have access to basic social services, have a safe place to sleep, and are protected from these multitude of armed actors. Perhaps I could just add on that, I think it's very, very true. There is a need for a political solution. That is always the case. A military approach will not work. It was also well said, the need for investment in development. What I think has lacked a little bit is the investment in the immediate humanitarian response, which is a key pillar. In terms of the military operations, another figure to share, more than 25% of people who were forced to flee their homes in 2019, I don't have the numbers for this year yet, fled military operations. So again, it's about putting the focus on protecting civilians, not just chasing designated terrorists. Also, the conflict dimension is much more complex than that. We are talking about inter-community conflicts as well. It is an extremely complex map, which Niagalé also gave us as well. The number of acronyms are complicated, but there's also conflicts between many communities. So to summarize, very complex situation. We need to use every tool in the toolbox, which includes diplomacy, which includes military, which includes development, which includes humanitarian assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. I'm conscious that we've got 1 minute left and I've got 2 people wanting to ask questions. So before I go back to Usman or Alex, I'm going to ask Lord Chidgey to ask his question and then Lord Judd.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, is it not the case that we need to concentrate much more than we do on the rebuilding of civilian structures and organization? There's a reluctance in aid agencies not to put money into indefinable outcomes. I think we've got a particularly poor record on that. My experience working in Francophone Africa and looking at refugee camps, it really is almost insulting not to recognize that the communities have the capacity to run and organize their own affairs, given the protection that they need, given the resources that they need to do that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And Frank Judd.
I'm afraid he can't hear, bless him.
Frank? Are you muted, perhaps? Hello, Frank. We got you, Frank? Nope. Okay.
I got it. Right. Sorry about that. I just a fascinating discussion. I was very glad that the point was emphasized that we really must look at the community-based security arrangements and forego the temptation still to manage events all from the outside. It is terribly important that the approach to security is built from the bottom upwards. But the one question that sort of hovers in my mind is, have we got any hopes, anxieties about the new administration, which we all hope to see in office in January in the United States? How is this going to affect what is going on in Africa?
Great question. Thank you very much. Right, Usman, I'm going to come to you. I'm sorry to all the speakers. They're going to have to be brief in responding. Maybe pick out a particular point you want to refer to, and then we'll manage to get everybody in. So Usman, could you pick out something and respond to it? Thanks.
Sure. So I'm going to pick up Mr. Gazeley's question and Lord Chidgey's also. So regarding the appropriateness of being involved in Mali after the coup d'etat of August, I think it depends on the different governments, and their approach to it, because the United States has suspended all of its military partnerships with Mali after the August 18 coup d'etat, while the EUTM has downscaled its operations. So they are still present in Mali, but they are not cooperating as much as before. And I think it is a very wise decision, because it's, as Niagalé has said, the coup d'etat in Mali illustrated defeat by all parties. There has been so many security sector reform initiatives in Mali, but there is always a gap between what the external interveners want to implement in Mali and how the Malian parties or the Malian officers how they want to use and leverage, and what are their expectations about the security sector reform. So it's good to probably downscale and look and have a political dialogue first before going back in. And regarding the need to rebuild the civilian structures and institutions asked by Lord Chidgey, I think it is a very important question. And if you look at the Sahel, it's not only the Sahel, it's West Africa. In the rural areas, the states and its institutions are often seen as apparatuses, as external apparatuses, that are aliens to those communities. And this is compounded by the fact that sometimes there is a language gap and a knowledge gap of the communities towards what are their rights towards the state and what can the, let's say, the prefect or the judiciary do in those local communities. So for example, you will find very few people that are knowledgeable and informed about the Malian Civil Code if you go in some of those rural areas, or that have a copy of it and that know that this is what they should expect from the states, this is how they can engage, this is how they can address grievances. And there is a tendency to go towards communitarian institutions, so informal institutions that will arbitrate and mediate between those communities. So probably there should be more convergence between those structures and institutions that are informal and that are based in local communities and in peripheral regions, and how the state's formal institutions is deployed in those communities. So I think there needs to be more synergy between those two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex, could you perhaps maybe reflect a little bit on that point about the new American administration as well, but also this issue about UK support for or training or whatever for the military in Mali?
Okay, I'll be as brief and as succinct as I can be. So the first point, I think, is that in terms of military training over the years, this has been highly unsuccessful by everybody. You're basically seeing investments into creating Praetorian guards that protect elites in capitals that are deeply contested and seen as fairly illegitimate. These states often are very contested. And one of the biggest dangers has therefore been that we have been encouraging fragile states to become brittle states. The only institution that kind of works is the military, but works very ineffectively and counterproductively, i.e. a number of the individuals that we've been involved in training have staged coups or have authorized human rights abuses. So rethinking this, I think, is really important, of getting a much more focus on how do you build up long-term institutions and not just focus on the military. So that's the broader point that I want to make. The second one on the US, I think that US engagement, particularly in the Sahel, will probably remain under a Biden administration. So there was a significant amount of debate of whether the 800 American troops in Niger would be downgraded under a Trump administration. I think that's probably going to now continue. Obviously, that's not just about the Sahel. The US footprint in Niger is a lot about Libya and North Africa also. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being brief, Alex. Maureen, maybe a quick reflection on the point about refugee camps from Lord Chidgey.
Absolutely in agreement that local populations hold the solutions to their own problems. And that's where I think the Coalition for the Sahel, the People's Pillars, which is a group of Sahelian civil society organizations that have come together and are really advocating for a different approach beyond just a militarized approach, is incredibly important. And we need to work in partnership. Thanks.
Great stuff. And I'm going to give the final word to Niagalé. Niagalé, if there is one thing you would want everybody who's listening today to remember from this conversation in the coming weeks when we're debating issues in Parliament and elsewhere, what is that one thing you'd want us to take away?
I think, just to summarize, it's important to understand that the situation today is a global insurgency. Of course, you have jihadi insurgency, but also rebel insurgency and also popular insurgency, as we just have seen in Mali, but also in Burkina Faso 6 years ago. And governance, it's really at the core of all the protests, because as all my colleagues have said, there is really the perception from the population that the state is a predator, is not a protector. And this is what we have to change.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you to all four contributors. Thank you to the dozens of people who've joined us to listen and to take part. This will be an ongoing issue, I'm sure, as we in the UK await the announcement of the government's integrated review into defence, diplomacy, development and security. And we will, of course, we watch events in the United States and elsewhere with interest as the international coalitions, hopefully in the coming months, not just treat the situation with urgency, but think through carefully and strategically exactly what they are doing to support people on the ground, not just to intervene. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to Hayley and Hetty for organising. And I hope this is just the first of a number of discussions that will be kicked off by the work of Crisis Action and our 4 speakers today. So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.